You ever have one of those moments? You've got this airtight argument, you are sure you're in the right, and then, bam, you get shut down on a technicality. Well, in today's explainer, that's exactly what we're diving into, a fascinating legal case where the calendar was literally more powerful than the complaint.
And just like that, with a few formal words from a judge, the whole dispute was over. Case closed. But the real story here isn't that it was dismissed, it's why. Why didn't they even get to the main event?
Yeah, that's the big question, right? We're talking about 404 votes that were being challenged. Votes that literally changed the entire fabric of a community. So how could a judge just not even look at them? Turns out, the answer has nothing to do with the votes themselves and everything to do with timing.
Okay, so let's break this down. First things first, who are we even talking about here? Let's meet the cast of characters in this little legal drama.
So you've got your petitioner, Richard M. Leckey. He's a resident, just a citizen. He's going up against the respondent, his own community club, Dreamland Villa. And the referee in all this, the Office of Administrative Hearings. It's a pretty classic setup, you know? An individual versus the organization.
So, what was the big deal? What were they fighting over? Well, it all boiled down to one single massive vote. And this wasn't just any vote, you know, about painting the clubhouse. No, this was a vote that completely reshaped the very identity of their community.
And this is the magic number, 404. Mr. Leckey's entire argument hinged on this. He was claiming that 404 of the signatures used in this big community vote were, well, invalid. He was basically saying, hey, these shouldn't have counted.
And believe me, those 404 votes were a huge deal. The outcome of that vote literally transformed Dreamland Villa from a voluntary club, you know, join if you want, into a formal, planned community, what most of us would just call an HOA, with mandatory rules and fees for everyone.
So Leckey's official complaint was pretty straightforward. He argued that by counting these questionable votes, the club had broken its own rules. We're talking its constitution and its bylaws, the very documents that are supposed to govern how they operate. He was basically accusing them of foul play to get this massive change pushed through.
Okay, but here's where it all gets really interesting. All that stuff about broken rules and questionable votes, the what of the case, well, it turned out to be completely irrelevant. The real deciding factor was the when. And this timeline says it all. Check this out. The vote everyone was arguing about, that happened way back in January 2004. But the law that actually gave this court the power to even hear this kind of case, that law didn't even exist until September 2006. That's a gap of more than 2.5 years. You can probably see where this is going.
Now, Leckey had a pretty clever comeback. He basically said, whoa, hold on. I didn't even find out about all this until late 2007, and by then the new law was already on the books. His argument was that the clock should start ticking from when he discovered the problem, not from when the problem happened. It's a decent point, but it smashed right into a huge legal roadblock.
And that roadblock brings us to the core legal principle that sunk his entire case. The judge really only had one question to answer. Can I use this new law to judge something that happened in the past?
The magic word here is retroactive. A law is retroactive if it can, like a time machine, go back into the past and apply new rules to things that have already happened. And while our legal system is usually very hesitant to do that, it just doesn't seem fair, right? To judge someone's past actions by a rulebook that hadn't even been written yet.
And that is precisely what the judge decided here. When he looked at the 2006 law, he found there was nothing, absolutely nothing in it that said it could have a retroactive effect. In other words, the law was not a time machine. It could only move forward in time, not backward.
Here's a simple way to think about it. Imagine you're in the middle of a board game with friends. Halfway through, you all agree to add a new rule. You can't then turn to your friend and say, aha, that move you made 3 turns ago is now illegal, so you're penalized. The law works pretty much the same way.
This whole idea is wrapped up in another super important legal term, jurisdiction. All jurisdiction means is the official power to make legal decisions. And a court's power isn't infinite. It's spelled out very clearly by the laws that create it. And that's the final piece of the puzzle. The court's power, its entire jurisdiction to even hear this case, came from that 2006 law. Since the law wasn't around in 2004 when the vote happened, the court simply had no authority, no power to rule on it. Those 404 votes were totally outside of its reach.
So after all that, what's the big takeaway from this one citizen's case getting tossed out? Well, it might seem like a small local dispute, but it's actually a perfect little lesson in how the machinery of the legal system really works.
Here are the key things to remember. First,
Laws aren't time machines. They almost always look forward, not back. Second, a court's power, its jurisdiction, is strictly limited by law. And the big one from this story, sometimes when something happened is way more important than what happened. Mr. Leckey might have had a great case about those 404 votes, but it didn't matter because he brought it to a court that legally couldn't even listen to him.
And this whole thing leaves us with a pretty deep question to chew on, doesn't it? It seems fair that you can't be judged by rules that didn't exist yet, but are there ever times when a law should be retroactive, maybe to fix some kind of huge injustice from the past? It's a tough one, and there are definitely no easy answers.